All right, guys. Thank you guys so much for getting here on time. Judy, Melissa, it's all on you.
Okay, thanks so much, Michael, and thanks everybody for being with us today. I am Judy Teven, and with me is Melissa Sinanu, and we are very excited to be here with you today to talk about RTI and MTSS processes. Now, our goal is for you to be able to really step back and look at what you currently have in place and make sure that you have the most effective and streamlined processes in place this next school year. And before we get started, I do want you to know that we will be recording this and sending it out to everyone who registered. And if you have questions during the webinar, please just go ahead and put those in chat. Our team is ready there to field them for you. And then, of course, we will have a Q&A at the end of our session as well.
So effective RTI and MTSS processes help make life easier for everyone. When implemented properly, teachers know each student's exact learning level. Interventionists have an identified group of students they're working with, and special education doesn't have any surprises or over-identification issues. Remember, effective RTI processes are prevention-focused. And this year, a clear process is more important than ever. Districts are bracing for large surges in students requiring intervention services this fall. This puts a lot of pressure on a district's RTI process.
That's right. And in truth, I've seen RTI district plans range from having no real plan in place, really, to have too much documentation required for assigning a student to a tier that teachers just didn't even pursue it for students. Now, both ends of this spectrum lead to students not getting the help that they need, right? Now, today's webinar not only takes us through all the steps of an effective, streamlined RTI MTSS process that's easy to implement, but it will also discuss the why and the research behind each step so that the value of this process is clear for all stakeholders. One of the most common challenges when a good RTI process isn't in place is over referral to special education. We've talked to so many districts this year whose school psychologists are overwhelmed with teacher referrals, and without the right mechanism in place to screen, progress monitor students, provide timely interventions, really this whole process can feel overwhelming and ultimately becomes a system that only helps students after a cycle of failure. And this means that a strong and effective RTI process is more important than ever. So first, let's do a short review of how RTI came to be and explore the benefits of a strong RTI process. So for years, students who struggled in class were referred for testing using the IQ achievement discrepancy model, right? Now, this model had been used for 3 decades. The students being tested were typically poor readers. Now, the problem was the model did not flag the student for help until the student was like in 3rd grade or above. And, those grades where reading abilities just starts to impact learning in multiple areas. So by that time, the student was well behind their peers and with the only options for help available through special education services. So it became clear that being behind in school and needing intervention did not necessarily mean that students had an inability to learn or qualified as EC students, right? Now, from that realization, a tiered intervention process was developed. Now, while in this process, students are simultaneously being serviced with proven interventions to catch them up, but also being monitored to determine if there is something that's inhibiting a student's ability to learn, such as a specific learning disability. Now, essentially, RTI gets students the help that they need earlier in their academic journey rather than allowing them to become instructional casualties.
So what does it look like when your RTI MTSS processes are working? All students are being screened 3 times a year, and we know where everyone is in relation to the rest of the district or the rest of the state or the rest of the nation, and that data is readily available to everyone. Then, once you understand who's performing below your targets, you have interventions in place to accelerate learning for those who need it. Weekly progress monitoring is also in place for students receiving interventions. This ensures that students are appropriately responding to the interventions and meeting growth targets. Now, another meaningful data point screening with RTI gives us is data about the strength of the Tier 1 curriculum. Now, this might not be as much of a focus for the 21-22 school year. However, there are some nice ways to analyze screening data that will help inform any obvious weaknesses in the core curriculum. And then finally, a good RTI process is a streamlined RTI process. Too many school districts use different screeners for different subjects or grades, multiple progress monitoring systems. Then they leave interventions up to the teachers, and then they add another place for teachers to upload data in order to centralize it. And this may be the biggest reason that we see some RTI initiatives struggle. They grow slowly until someone really looks at all the steps they're asking a teacher to take for every student, and they realize how unsustainable or unwieldy it is. So this coming year, especially when we expect to see so many students receiving intervention services, it is critical we have a process that is simple. So we understand the goals of an effective RTI process, and we know that a strong RTI process is going to be necessary for this school year. Now let's step through each of the necessary components. The core components of a strong RTI process are screening, progress monitoring, effective interventions, and a strong Tier 1 curriculum. And then naturally, social and emotional learning components are woven throughout this process as well.
And don't worry, with the right processes in place, teachers, interventionists, school psychologists, students, and parents can breathe easy and see those results, right? So let's start with screening. Screening is different from your on-grade level unit testing or on-grade level benchmarking, right? Screening is a mechanism to understand a student's overall readiness to learn for a specific grade level curriculum. And it typically measures both on grade level and below grade level skills and is either adaptive or vertically scaled, so it can give you a scaled score of a nationally normed readiness for the grade. Now, that scaled score gives you a grade level equivalency for each student. Now, this, of course, helps teachers identify who's working below grade level and the areas where they're struggling most. Now, additionally, teachers see areas of weakness for all students within the class, which they can use then to inform instruction and form those class groupings for small group instruction.
So, what to look for in a quality screener? One, ease of administration. The test length should be predictable and manageable for students and should definitely not take too long. You want parallel forms for administration with integrity 3 times a year. You want data that is actionable. So, as Judy said, scaled scores that tell grade level readiness, percentile ranks as compared both to the nation and like populations. Really, percentile ranks are one of the easiest ways to establish initial placement for students into tiers 1, 2, or 3. And then a bonus might be domain level scale scores that help determine intervention areas of focus. So resources like the National Center for Intensive Intervention have a great list of screeners to choose from. The Classworks screener, Reading and Math, grades K-8, has very high ratings for both validity and reliability. It also offers that percentile ranking that you'll want to start your process off strong. So following those NCII guidelines, Classworks will suggest you place students into the following tiers based on their scores. The 10th percentile or below is urgent intervention or tier 3. 25th percentile or below is typically tier 2. And then above the 20th percentile is tier 1. However, Classworks will also separate out between the 25th and 40th percentile, so teachers can keep an eye on those students throughout the year. So next, as we previously mentioned, once a student has been determined to need tier 2 or tier 3 services, we want to progress monitor them to make sure they are responding to the intervention. So we're all familiar with the graph associated with progress monitoring. The reason we graph this data is to track how effective the intervention is through a measure like weekly progress monitoring. Then, if a student isn't responding to the intervention, it also shows up on the graph. So simply put, progress monitoring allows educators to measure student performance throughout the intervention period instead of at the end. Progress monitoring lets you know which students are succeeding, which students might be struggling to make progress. Then this information is used to make decisions about the student's educational plan and make adjustments as needed. The timeliness and sensitivity of the data is what makes it such a meaningful part of RTI.
Progress monitoring gets implemented 1 million different ways, right, in systems across the country. However, there are some important elements to look for, with ease of use being really at the top of the list. Curriculum-based measurement, or CBM probes, are generally accepted as the industry standard for progress monitoring. Now, CBM is the process by which a student's learning is measured with repeated administrations of equated or parallel probes. Now, when used for progress monitoring, curriculum-based measurements should have the following characteristics. They should be brief, right? Easy to administer and administered the same way every time. They should assess the same content every time, either a specific domain or by sampling the year-long grade level curriculum. Now, probes need to offer reliable and valid scores, right? And these scores should be graphed, like Melissa just showed you, for teachers to use to make decisions about instructional programs and teaching methods for each student. And data you receive should be highly prescriptive and standardized. And finally, CBM probes measure any instructional approach, right? So making no assumptions about instructional hierarchy for determining measurement.
So within CBM progress monitoring, there are two different options. These are global indicators and curriculum sampling. So Lynn and Douglas Fuchs, the well-known researchers in educational assessment, they explain the two types of progress monitoring this way. So two types exist. The first is to assess performance regularly on a single task that serves as a global indicator of competence at the relevant grade level. The second approach is to systematically sample the year-long curriculum so that each skill is represented and receives the same emphasis on alternate forms. So the difference the Fuchs described between the two is that a global indicator is selecting one skill that has been determined to be an indicator of overall proficiency of a grade. For example, a student's ability to master math computation within the second grade curriculum is an indication of proficiency in the entire second grade math curriculum. The other, curriculum sampling, is that repeated assessment that includes items from across the entire grade level. So global indicators may be the most effective when you're concerned about a specific skill for perhaps a tier 2 student, while you may elect to use curriculum sampling for a student in tier 3 who's multiple grade levels below and is struggling in a wide variety of areas. Now, that said, both options are considered acceptable when you're looking for your progress monitoring tools. If you do select a platform with both options, you have maximum flexibility to use the test type that's right for each student in each tier.
So there are a lot of great programs out there that offer both of these types of progress monitoring. NCII also offers a list of progress monitoring tools they recommend, and Classworks is proud to be represented there as well. Now, once you get past the must-haves of progress monitoring, probably the two most important things to consider are the sustainability of a progress monitoring process, read ease of use for the teacher, and the data and reporting that is automatically generated for every student or group of students. So when implementing a progress monitoring tool for both tiers 2 and 3 and students with disabilities, it's important to consider a program being implemented for larger groups of students. How easy is it for the teacher to turn on, run reports, look at dashboards, and make those adjustments? Now, for example, the Classworks progress monitoring can be started with just a few simple clicks and will automatically appear each week for 12 weeks on the student's Classworks dashboard. Now, the data from that probe is automatically plotted on the appropriate charts, and it also informs the student's intervention. Now, teachers can add notes or other information as needed, noting things such as adjustments to the intervention. Having all of this information in one place ensures fidelity as soon as teachers hit start without asking them to do one more thing. And this year especially, we are expecting larger numbers of students in tiers 2 and 3. So you really want to process it simple for everyone.
And then one other piece we work with so many of our districts on is effective parent communication. A strong RTI program always includes regular communication with a variety of stakeholders, including parents. And especially for those perhaps new or unfamiliar with the tiered process, this may be the first time their child needs intervention support services. So a simple process with no stigmas where parents see the benefits quickly is also really instrumental to a good RTI process. For example, something like the students' My Scores page in Classworks, it can be shared with parents as a live link so they can not only see their progress on the interventions, but also their progress on the goals they're setting for themselves and any notations in their daily report card or positive behavioral intervention plan.
And the other really important thing to think about is that larger data and reporting, right? You want both dashboards that show those larger groups of students, but also reports that automatically track individual students' rate of improvement through the course of their intervention. It's great to have dashboards that help you as district administrators ensure fidelity of your RTI implementation. Are all students taking the screener? Are students participating in progress monitoring like you expect and need them to for those documentation purposes? Knowing all of this information as early as possible helps to avoid challenges later.
Then the student data needs to be actionable and easy to understand for teachers. When progress monitoring a student, you want to be able to easily set a growth goal and see the gains each week. Then, if you don't see the growth you expected, you have some decisions to make. Is this the right intervention for that student? What changes can be made to benefit the student? Or perhaps, is there a specific learning disability that is impeding a student's progress and they would benefit from special education services? This is a really good question to ask of your progress monitoring vendor. How does their professional development help teachers not only plot the data and push the buttons, but also make sense of that data and make good decisions based on what they are seeing? That's something that we've made sure is incorporated into all of our trainings, and it makes a real difference for our education partners.
And this takes us to the next and arguably most important aspect of a good RTI process, and that is an effective intervention. Now, while screening and progress monitoring provide the necessary documentation of where students are and where they're headed, we can't forget the true goal of RTI is to close gaps and support success as students learn those grade level standards. So, what does make an intervention effective? Well, let's start with a little background.
That's right. The two most commonly recognized models for RTI interventions are called standard protocol and problem solving. And both of these are distinct from the approach the core curriculum takes. Now, a key strength of the problem solving model is individualization, but the time it takes to implement is not always practical. So many schools opt for standard protocol as a manageable option. For example, imagine you have a group of 5 third graders who are all reading below grade level. In the problem-solving model, the teacher will find an intervention for each student to address their specific gaps in understanding. As you can imagine, this works wonderfully for the student, but is much more difficult for a teacher to implement. The standard protocol takes this same group of students and gives all students the exact same intervention curriculum to improve their reading. It's not as specific, but the theory is that at some point during the intervention period, every student will get what they need to succeed. So Edward Shapiro, a leading researcher of RTI practices, actually likes the idea of blending the two. The combining of a standard protocol and problem-solving model, if possible to implement in a school, is likely to lead to the greatest responsiveness of students. The hybrid approach to RTI would offer the best of both worlds for students. So the Classworks intervention process actually automatically blends these two models, creating an ideal learning environment for all students. This model specifically accounts for students at all tiers and all grades. Classworks combines the most effective aspects of each model, leveraging technology to minimize the teacher time needed for that all-important individualization.
And additionally, this fall, we're hearing from almost all our systems that they're including designated blocks of time for students to work on their individual skills in order to close those learning gaps. Now, this is separate from the standard instructional time, right? These dedicated blocks, sometimes called extra learning time or ELT, have already proven invaluable as districts work to close gaps and support students as they catch up. Now, whether they are facilitated by certified teachers or paraprofessionals, this is a strategy that we highly recommend for all bell schedules. And if you're using a technology program for this period, all stakeholders can then access student progress.
This is important because teachers should be able to easily monitor every aspect of a student's work, whether learning happened in a station rotation in their classroom, during an intervention block, or after school. In programs like Classworks, teachers can view all activities assigned to their student and make any adjustments they deem necessary. Remember, a good RTI tool will lift the burden from the teacher, not add to it. So too often we encounter districts making the mistake of repeating the core curriculum at a slower pace during intervention periods. It's important to remember that studies show over and over again, interventions must be different from the core curriculum or the remediation. Truly effective interventions should target weak areas and approach the skill using a different methodology. Intervention should be driven by data. The best results are going to come from instruction that has been individualized for students based on their screening and progress monitoring. And then activities should be skill specific with data that can be documented and tracked. This ensures that the instruction being received is perfect for the student's performance level, challenging but not too hard. Not only does this ensure that students are growing, but being able to accomplish the activities keeps them from throwing in the towel.
And in an intervention platform like Classworks, intervention instruction is automatically assigned to each student based on screener and progress monitoring data. So this is really putting the data to work for the teacher automatically.
That's right, Judy. There are a lot of great options out there, but here's just a little bit more information about how the Classworks intervention works. So Classworks individualizes the skills for each student within a learning progression to ensure every student is working on skills they are ready to learn. So what is a learning progression? Learning progressions are a continuous pathway along which students move incrementally through increasing competence. Every incremental stage builds on the previous one as students acquire new levels of expertise along each successive step in the progression. The benefit of this in an RTI process is that every student is automatically placed in the exact skill they are ready to learn within the progression. Now, not only is every student placed exactly where they are ready to learn, Classworks also skips the skills an assessment determines they already know. This ensures that all time spent in the Classworks intervention is relevant to what every student needs. Now, this year especially, we want every minute the student is spending on their intervention to be on exactly the skills that are right for them. So all of this is automatically active for every student based on their screener results, instead of asking the teacher to find and assign the right interventions.
Yep, having intervention prescribed for each student really then shifts the teacher's role, right? Instead, the teacher can focus on monitoring how students are progressing on the intervention, conferencing with them about areas for improvement, and motivating them by providing incentives and celebrating wins. This really connects into your SEL initiatives, right? SEL components should really be embedded into the intervention and not exist as a standalone process. Now, when I taught, was in the classroom, SEL was regulated to an SEL curriculum taught like in homeroom addressing, say, making friends. Through the years, it's become evident that working on social and emotional skills with students can't be contained to 1 hour a month or even really once a day. These are skills that students need to work on all through a school day, right? So why is this important? Well, SEL directly impacts how students perform in a class, reducing negative behavior such as bullying and really addressing the needs of students who come to school with those SEL deficits. Now, other benefits include happy students who come to school more often, stay in school, and ultimately improve their academic performance. Students who are comfortable and calm are really just more prepared to learn, right? And that's really big. Using an SEL screener identifies the students who have those deficits, but then what's next? Most of these skills are left to be taught, practiced, and reinforced by our classroom teachers. So teachers need tools to help them track goals and progress within the SEL realm on a regular basis. Now, as Melissa mentioned earlier, a daily behavioral report card is key to sustaining communication with students and parents. Again, building that student ownership of their actions and their learning. Now, as observations track what is happening, student goal setting takes ownership really to the next level by asking students, what exactly are you trying to achieve? Now, our Classworks goal tracker uses that SMART goal framework to create a goal, set the steps to achieve it, and then determine a timeline to accomplish it. And this is so powerful for students. Goals need time frames and measurable action steps along the way, right? So that students can keep track of progress and make adjustments as necessary. Goal tracking builds student ownership and really offers a sense of control over outcomes.
And now, an additional aspect of your comprehensive RTI process does include ensuring you have a high quality tier 1 curriculum that is supporting all students learning all the key skills each year. Your screener can help with this as well. In addition to identifying student needs, your screener can highlight any gaps in your tier 1 curriculum. Are all students in the fall of 5th grade seeming to struggle with geometry? A high quality screener will show you that at a glance. This gives you the opportunity to look at your curriculum and the rigor of your practices and a chance to possibly make changes to the 4th grade curriculum for the next year. Now, like I said before, most of our partner systems are not worrying about wholesale adjustments to the core curriculum this year, and with good cause. But as part of an overview of RTI, we wanted to make sure you got the whole picture. So finally, making sure the process is sustainable. When thought about in isolation, each step to a strong RTI process seems straightforward. We're going to screen all of our students. We're going to review the data, decide who needs to be in each tier. We're going to progress monitor the students receiving intervention services, and we're going to deliver high quality interventions for all students. Then ultimately, we will use the data to make adjustments to interventions as students progress or refer students for special education testing if they aren't progressing. But let's think about what we're asking teachers to master. One program to screen, another for progress monitoring, another to centralize the data for administrators, data tracking practices that make sense, and then finding and delivering the right interventions for every scenario. So when this becomes too much for teachers, RTI loses focus as a meaningful support for students. Then the special education department and school psychologists become overwhelmed with referrals that may or may not be grounded in research.
And this is why a single platform like Classworks, embedded into your classroom stations or centers and extra learning time, can make it a really seamless and research-based practice for all. Classworks automatically assigns a screener to all students at the beginning of the year. Now, both math and ELA are in one platform. So then the intervention is automatically created for every student based on the assessment results. Progress monitoring is also in that same platform, making life easier for teachers and students. The best of all, progress monitoring also adapts that learning path so that no student's intervention is ever out of date. Now, all the data is already centralized inside of Classworks, so it doesn't need to be moved into another platform. You have detailed progress monitoring reports, specific data on how students are responding to the skills of the intervention, and district dashboards that ensure that all practices are being implemented with fidelity.
One of the biggest points of relief for interventionists, school psychologists, and teachers when they start to implement RTI practices with Classworks is how easy it is to create a sustainable practice. So we recommend doing a thorough review of every stage of your RTI process before next year, and think about all the little things that you're asking staff to do and see if there are ways to streamline and simplify. What data are you using to identify students for intervention? Is it clear and easy to understand? As you monitor interventions, do teachers understand their next steps? Is a research-based intervention immediately available for students, or do teachers have to dedicate time to finding resources to meet student need? Make sure it's easy to collect the data you need to make tier adjustments as students work on interventions. The same data should be reviewed throughout the process to ensure the integrity of decision-making. Honestly, something as easy as collapsing all of your progress monitoring tools under one platform can save school psychologists so much time and help classroom teachers better contribute to analyzing the data and modifying the interventions.
Okay, we know we've shared a lot of information, and we hope that you have had some good ideas or gotten some food for thought about how best to set up your RTI processes for next year. So we really appreciate you being with us today. Now, of course, if you're in our Classworks family and something rang bells for you and you need some help setting that up and integrating that into your implementation, please reach out and let us know. We'll be glad to help you out with that. I do think we had some questions coming in. The chat was active, and so we probably have some time to take some of those.
Yeah, we've gotten a couple of really thoughtful questions, guys. So thank you for that. And just as a reminder, like Judy said, the chat box is where to go. If you have a question, just drop it in there. We'll make sure we get it answered. But to kick things off, how can a high school make intervention successful when starting the new school year with a 30-minute advisory period 4 times a week for all students? The feedback from seasoned teachers is that this period just becomes a study hall.
You want me to do that? Take that one.
We can start to answer that question, but it's probably a great longer conversation, right?
Yeah. Honestly, it's about kind of, to me, I check back into what have I seen work? So we've had some experiences in some high schools that were amazing, that had what they maybe had assigned mentors that were kind of in charge of those advisories. And so that those facilitators had ownership of that group of students, and then they would work with them. And they actually worked on Classworks during that time. And of course, some of the groups did some other enrichment things, or maybe some even like things that were more career, forward focused for students that were a little bit, more on track or above level or college track. So there's a lot of flexibility. That's an amazing thing to have in your schedule and can really impact student performance. But we have absolutely seen that, seen Classworks integrated into that type of a schedule.
And it is the idea of it being super individualized at that point, right? And in high school in particular, the students knowing the why of what they're doing so they don't check out, right? And there's a lot with that. Yeah, that is great though to have that time.
Thanks, guys. Starting off strong with these questions. So we did have one come in. Might be a good time to clarify what does Classworks target specifically in a grade level band? So what grade levels does Classworks cover?
We're K-8, and then we do have some high school. But again, our high school implementations are typically in an intervention type period or special education as well.
And our screener goes through 10th grade.
Right.
What does it mean when you say that an RTI process should be prevention focused?
So yeah, that's a great question. So when you look at the RTI rubrics that you see, some of the most common mistakes that districts make is that they think an RTI process is just kind of a slower process to document towards special education, but really it's about the idea of catching everybody and then catching them up so that we aren't referring students for special education, right? So we're preventing that referral. That's really the focus.
And how often should I be using a program like Classworks each week for intervention?
Oh, I can grab that one. So we recommend 30 to 45 minutes per subject per week. But now that can be broken apart into several times a week, that type of a thing. But I also want to stress that that's instructional recommendation time, not assessment time. And we know that that has been that's come up in lots of implementations that we've been working with, just that sometimes the intervention time gets taken over by assessment and by taking assessments. So make sure that you're really not just covering your assessment time, that kids are going to have to take their probes or screening and all that kind of thing, but make sure that they really truly have a decent amount of instructional time each week, that they're working on closing those gaps.
We mentioned so many different aspects of Classworks, individualized learning, progress monitoring. How are they priced individually? So guys, great thing is actually Classworks is an all-in-one solution. So when you buy Classworks, you get everything. And since we do have a couple of questions about where to get more information, if you go to classworks.com and use a little chat icon in the bottom right corner, you can get in touch with somebody to talk about bringing Classworks into your school or district. So again, classworks.com, you can see it at the bottom of the slide here, and you can get in touch that way. But moving on, what kind of modifications and accommodations does Classworks provide for special ed students?
Oh, good question. So, yep, there's a lot of tools embedded in Classworks, read aloud support, those types of things that really bring all of those accommodations around for students that need that, for that read aloud support, that type of thing. And then there's also, because all of the data is in real time, students get feedback immediately. So that's why I think a lot of our special education implementations have been so strong, is because the teachers have really embraced that and they're able to really get back with students and really embed that conferencing and things like that. There's also a lot of flexibility in Classwork. So they'll utilize creating specific lessons for students that it revolves specifically around their IEP goals and things like that. They'll use a lot of our, and you have access to every grade level when you have Classworks. So if you have to pull kids off multiple grade levels, teachers don't have to search for below level materials, even to map back to their IEP goals. They have everything right there. So we've really found that it's been a really good match for special education.
And it's one of the reasons that we've been case endorsed for such a long time.
Exactly.
Definitely. Thank you, guys. Those were all of the questions that I had on my list that I've seen that's come through chat.
So I got a question about
Sure.
why the intervention should be different than last year's curriculum. We mentioned that so many studies show how important it is that you don't replicate what you already did. And I think when you, of course, research showing it out is important, but when we think about it logically, if we failed to learn something one way in third grade, giving it to us again the exact same way in the intervention period in fourth grade is really only going to cause frustration, right? The chance to try to learn something in a different way and apply a different set of skills to learning that really is what helps interventions work and be successful. So when you think about whatever you're using to teach your lesson planning and tier 1 curriculum, you really want your intervention to be a completely different approach. Sorry, Michael.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. I was just going to say those are all of the questions that I've got. But if we have any more come in, now is the time to ask. While we wait for any more questions to come in, just to reiterate, if you do have any further questions about Classworks, that chat bubble on our website is your best friend. We also have a button to book a demo. So if you're curious about what you've seen today, definitely take advantage of that. But we'll give it just another minute or so to see if anybody else has any last minute questions before we end the presentation. Is it price per student or whole school pricing? Both, depending on the size of your implementation. And again, we'd be happy to talk with you more about that after contacting us.
Well, thanks, guys. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, Judy.